come up at a time where hip hop fashion, as it was named then, kind of first came to the fore. So designers like Carl Kanai, Cross Colors, P&B Nation, Eniche, all these American brands. Going back to the big brands I've worked in, half of our research was understanding culture, shifting culture, because we're designing for the future.
Richard Rich Black Mkoloma, raised in London between church suits, track spikes, and street corners. He learned early that identity isn't singular, and neither is style. Trained in tailoring, sharpened in denim, battle-tested in global sportswear.
I was at Puma for a number of years and I had a lot of fun because I was able to execute my ideas because there was a big machine behind me.
Richard has worked inside the system long enough to question it. He is a fashion designer, educator, creative polymath, and music collaborator. He is here to discuss accountability in leadership, why fast fashion is coming for African heritage.
I think protect what we have, our legacy. You don't go to Italy and demand the finest Italian craftsmanship at a cheap price, but people come here and do it.
What's the hardest truth that you've had to tell a young designer? Hello and welcome to the Rooted in Quality podcast. Today we're sitting with Richard Rich Black Mkoloma, a fashion strategist and educator, and someone who is passionate about what fashion can become on this continent. With a career that spans both the classroom as well as having worked with internationally famous brands like Sean John, Puma, and Adidas, he has the kind of experience that any person in the fashion space would envy. And today he's joined us to give us more insights into his career and his journey so far. Richard, good morning and thanks for joining us here at Afro Quality.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So first up, thank you for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation and to be just a part of this broader conversation around how we can shift and move things forward on the continent.
When I look at your experience and your track record, you've worked with Puma, Sean John, Adidas, AFI, and now you're advising African brands. Mm-hmm. When you look at your career, do you see a straight line or do you see like a series of accidents that got you to build the kind of track record that you have? Yes,
good question. So to give, I guess, context, I grew up in London and, I grew up as, I guess, like we call a third culture kid, right? So I'm Caribbean on one side, African on one side, grew up in London. And with that, you get lots of different inputs, if I look back at the genesis of me going into fashion and what my reference points were, I was an avid sportsman.
Okay.
So I would play sports all the time. I would run track, I ran for clubs, play football. After school, you're out in the streets, so you're in your street clothes. We'd go to church, on Sundays, so you're in your smart clothes and you have uniform. So I've always had this fascination with how I blend and mix my aesthetic, my identities, because I'm traveling through these different spaces, wearing very different types of attire, right? And so a lot of this informed my approach. So at university, I studied fashion and I specialized in tailoring, but my tailoring incorporated ideas from sportswear in terms of fabrications and cut lines and approach to ergonomics. My tailoring also incorporated ideas from denim, shape, cut, fit. So all these elements, like smart clothing, performance clothing, as well as what we now know as streetwear, have all informed what I do. So when I've worked at various companies, I started off training at Paul Smith. I trained with the bespoke tailors, so I got that kind of high level training. But I took that approach to cut and fit into denim. Okay. When I worked on denim, as well as incorporating sportswear elements. So I was always into aesthetic fusion. I was never in one lane. So, I went from denim, worked on a few projects, worked for various companies, and then I went into sportswear. And sportswear, I took ideas from denim, ideas from tailoring into sportswear, which helps shape, I guess, a different aesthetic or a new aesthetic or proposition. In short, for me, the line has been fairly straight, even though I know it's not a traditional route. Some designers, I'm a denim designer, that's all I do is denim. I love denim. I'm a tailor. I'm going to tailor. I'm a contemporary fashion designer, that's all I do. I've always liked to mix and match. So wherever I've gone, I've taken all these learnings and elements with me. And so, yeah, that's the fun part. The through line is I've generally worked on a lot of startup projects and expansion projects. So small brands, small labels will have started lines, and I've generally been brought in to help expand those lines, give the line some direction, some focus, usually in the startup phase, so the first year or two, and some from inception. So that's the thing that's carried through, I think, all through my career.
What did London teach you about identity that Paris or New York or probably Nairobi could never?
I think, when you grow up in the diaspora, so being of color, black, outside of the African continent, you naturally just have a variety of experiences. And I think what it's taught me is flexibility, cultural flexibility, in the sense of blending cultures, the friends I hang out with, the places I go, the musics I'm into, the food I eat. There's a tremendous flexibility around all of it, while still, kind of coming under this banner of being black or being, black British, British African, Afro-Caribbean. There's so many terms, right? But essentially, I think what I've personally got is a sense of cultural flexibility where, I'm able to own my own culture and who I am, acknowledge the different parts of me while also explore.
But are there times that you feel lost?
Never.
Or you feel like you'd want to belong to one particular aspect?
No, never. I think this is very deliberate. When you grow up and someone asks you where you're from, and I'd say, part of me is Malawian. Okay, so what's the other part? Barbados. So which one are you more? Are you more Malawian or more Barbadian? And Barbados, Barbadian, Bajan. So that's you'll hear me reference that. And it's always been a very strange question to be asked. It's like, well, this is who I am, and I'm also in England, so there's a part of me that's very British as well. So for me, it's always been a fusion. There's no one over the other. At times, I feel, I'll say something or I'll do something, and I know exactly where that comes from.
In your professional life, you've been called a strategist, a designer, an educator. But which of these roles do you think reflects the real you?
I started my career as a designer. Studied fashion. So you go into the career. You're sketching. You're creating garments.
You're cutting.
You realize very quickly in the industry that it's very strategic, right? Because you're balancing commerciality with aesthetics and creativity, and you're doing it in a very specific, focused way to satisfy whatever the brand stands for or whoever the customer is and what they expect from you in terms of product. So you quickly realize that it's all very strategic, and you learn a lot of this as you're studying as well. I think designers occupy a space adjacent to, quote unquote, pure artists who, from my perspective, would put out a proposition into the world, whether that's aesthetic, creative, or intellectual. Designers, a lot of the time, we are putting out aesthetics in the world that also answer questions and try to solve some solutions. So strategic, my work has always been quite strategic. I came to education through one of my side hustles, side hobbies, music, being a poet, being an MC. That's, from that perspective, was when I first got asked to develop and lead workshops working with young people. And so I came for education through music. It was only later that I started to educate in the fashion space. So these things are all a part of the process.
In your experience, you've done work that's influenced a lot of street culture, and we see street culture has gone from like the pavement to luxury runways in this lifetime. Do you feel like you were part of it as a revolution, or is it like a takeover of the street culture by the people with money?
I think it's a bit of both. I was lucky enough. I'm a big hip hop fan. I'm a hip hop kid. A lot of my work would reference hip hop culture in some shape or form, or even just down to attitude. And what's interesting was, I was lucky enough to kind of come up at a time where hip hop fashion, as it was named then, kind of first came to the fore. So designers like Carl Kanai,
Kanye, yeah.
Cross Colors, PNB Nation, Iniche, all these American brands that were Echo,
Yes,
Morris Malone. These were all like influences for me because I saw people who looked like me reflected. I understood the energy, the attitude, the struggles, the joy, and the aesthetic. And these were people from the culture creating their own presence, right? Their own brands, businesses that reflected them. And I was lucky enough, once I'd started my career, to work for a streetwear brand in Sean John. So someone, an icon that was very central to the culture at the time, who created a collection in amongst his peers and his contemporaries that reflected his point of view on the lifestyle. So we were commercializing culture. We were also, kind of stamping our place within contemporary mainstream society. And so you've seen both. You've seen street culture be influenced by fashion and take all the bits of fashion that weren't initially for it and create their own space, their own lane. And then, so it's almost like a remixing of culture.
Okay.
We even growing up, we would take regular jeans and we'd oversize them. We would pinroll them. We'd have all these different ways to kind of make them our own. And then seeing designers do the same thing from scratch, there's this crossover where the culture informs wider society or corporate space. Corporate space then gets on board and in some instances co-opts it, some instances informed by it. So this is the eternal question, like where's the line?
I remember there was a time when I think there was a big news about P. Diddy. At the time it was Sean Puffy Combs.
Yeah.
And I think there was a collaboration where there was a special Lincoln Navigator that was like Sean John Lincoln version. Yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, were those probably the early days where the street culture and the street fashion was gradually beginning to cross over into mainstream for like a big brand like Lincoln to put out a brand that was somewhat very high-end, premium, but for the streets.
This was a time when I think there was a lot of tension around these conversations where, what was the line between corporate intent and culture? And there was always tension. I remember there was a KRS-One ad, he did something for Nike, I believe it was, and there was tension. There was Sprite, we're working with rappers. There was tension where were rappers selling out or were they expanding culture? And now we've seen this conversation doesn't exist as much.
It's normalized now that you actually will begin to think that it's always been like this.
Yeah.
But whilst you're talking, it just crossed my mind that there was a time when the street culture and the creative space were not really mainstream corporate
at all. And it's that space of we want to blow up, but we don't want to go pop, right? Yeah. We want to cross over without losing ourselves, losing our authenticity. We want to show the world what we have to offer, who we are, and we want them to buy into it. But the question is always going to be is when is too far, too far? But I think what you see now, which is interesting, you see kids, or you see leaders of companies and organizations who grew up on various cultures. And if we're talking about hip hop in this instance, hip hop culture, who are now leading high-end luxury brands. They're head designers, they're artistic directors, they're creative directors, and it's their vision that is now informing what these quite conservative, kind of staid luxury brands, were about and what they stood for. And it's changing both from being influenced from what's happening on the street, but also what's happening inside, and people, designers and creatives who are informed by hip hop culture or street culture or skateboarding, who are saying, you know what, this is what I want to put forward. So now that question's even, that space is even more blurred.
And when you look at it, Virgil was like a fashion person, like he was in the space, like hands-on in the industry. And Pharrell is like a music icon, very little known about him in terms of the fashion space and what he's built in that space. But then now he goes to occupy such a space in LVMH as a creative director. Is it just to represent the culture, but not so much about the craft? And does that not represent some form of appropriation, or, I don't know, like it's playing to the streets from a very commercial point of view, but not really where you can see the person hands-on be able to actually drive the creative agenda in LVMH?
What's interesting, I think, to give Pharrell his credit, like he's had his own clothing line for a very long time, right? Ice Cream, Billionaires Boys Club, he's been a part of street fashion at a high level for
With his brand,
for over a decade, right? So he comes into it, I think, with credentials. He's more importantly, what he became was a cultural player. And I think this is where you're seeing the shift with luxury brands, not just wanting to have designers as head designers. And there's lots of contestation in industry because designers who have grinded, they've worked their way up, and now they're seeing these top positions being held by people who didn't train purely as designers. But Pharrell's had his own clothing company for a while, very successful, very influential. So he has credibility coming into it, maybe not in the high-end fashion space, but the high-end streetwear space, most certainly. But what you're seeing is brands leaning in, as they try to extend their legacy, leaning into culture. I think Virgil was a big cultural conversation, because he came from architecture, I believe, and he came from working with Kanye and working as his art director, creative director, into launching his own smaller labels, Paris Vision, Off-White, and then going into LVMH. And I think what's interesting, they're having broader conversations that extend or transcend just pure design. And I say this as a designer, Okay. So I understand what they're doing, why they're doing it. Am I skeptical? I think, the proof's going to be in the pudding. It's on the work that comes out. And I think as long as there's space for design teams to protect this, work on their craft and present that, there shouldn't be much of a problem, but we'll see. I've worked with a few different companies, and the first thing that you realize going in is you're a part of a team. You have your leadership, your senior leadership members, your creative directors, your design directors. Then you have designers that work on different aspects of collections, sometimes whole collections or whole capsules. Companies operate differently depending, but you realize you're a part of a team, and so not even these headline designers, they're not designing everything themselves. They have people around them. So this should be no different. It's somebody setting a vision, and it's up to designers and creatives to be given space to present their craft.
So you decided to shift from operating in the biggest global markets and first a stopover in South Africa, now in Kenya. Did you see this as an opportunity, or is it a risk to your career and your trajectory?
I'd worked on small niche brands that bridge the gap between the continent and Europe on an advisory capacity prior. Notably working with a really amazing kind of small luxe brand. It's no longer around, called Mosaic. It was women's wear. Really stunning pieces that reference her heritage of growing up in Europe and in Ghana. And that was the first big project I worked on, or interesting project I worked on. I guess the large scale project I worked on was working with Africa Fashion International down in South Africa, a fashion week platform. They used to be the the producers of the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week down in South Africa. They've since taken back the asset, and now they run their own independent fashion shows at a very high level. I came across them during the World Cup in South Africa. And what was interesting, when the opportunity came to work with them, I had to make a decision, stay in Europe. You know, I had a job offer to stay in Europe, and I had a job offer to come to help expand their operations from being a fashion week platform into clothing, into creating their own in-house fashion brand. One was stable. Europe was stable. It was a brand that had been around for a long time. Great people. Or take a risk and look at a different opportunity to create something really impactful on the continent. And I decided to take the riskier move, which was to work with this organization who wanted to in fashion, but wanted to transition into a new space. And so, seeing that as it was an opportunity for me. I saw it as an opportunity, and there's always a bit of risk involved as well, because it was a little bit less certain. But they've gone on to to launch the fashion brand. They've maintained the fashion brand as well as the fashion week. So I think there's a contribution there that I'm particularly quite proud of. But yeah, it's going into new space is always going to be a risk. But I think this is where the opportunity is, and I think the whole world is trying to get into Africa to do something. So I think I was on the cusp of that. Yeah.
It's easy to see the success points, but what has been your experience with rejection?
Yeah, rejection has only come when applying for jobs and not getting them. That's the only time I felt rejected as such, but that's normal, right? I think what you realize going into the industry is there are loads of different challenges, some that you can control, some you can't. And I've been a part of lines that aesthetically were great, but the business end wasn't where it should have been to facilitate the creativity that was being pushed out. I've been at companies where we've started up really hot, market shifts, change. So there hasn't been anything I would call a rejection. There have been certainly successes, highs, disappointments, lows, and the sobering realization is that there's an industry wrapped around your creativity. There's a business wrapped around your creativity, should I say. And for organizations to truly thrive, they need to have multiple functions working, at the same simultaneously, but also quite cohesively. Otherwise, it's easy for the ship to kind of sink. So yes, I think the biggest thing that I've learned hasn't been rejection. It's just stepping back and understanding the pieces that need to be in place for success to really, flourish.
Pushing a little bit on that. So is there a part of you that, or maybe of your journey, that you rarely talk about, which probably defines you the most?
I think every experience has shaped me to some degree. Industry, politics, industry challenges, personality clashes, but there's nothing that's, unless it's super personal, that I wouldn't get into in a public forum. But generally, in terms of that shape me as a professional, there's not much that I haven't or wouldn't speak about.
Now, when you walk through all the big global fashion houses that you worked in, did you ever feel like a contributor or a cultural interpreter, or was there like the need to borrow from somebody like you because you have actually been a craftsman before coming into the big fashion corporate space?
Yeah, I think it's been it's both things. I think as I started off, as most of us do, going through fashion college, designing, creating your own pieces, in the studio a lot. And I think with every job I've had, you realize again, it's the idea of team. It's you go into a job and you're not given a pair of shears and said, okay, go cut the fabric. Your job is to help shape the direction, design the product, work with those in the studio, the people crafting the actual product. Sometimes working with factories or small makers. And so, yes, you do get a bit more removed from the actual making.
The final.
But a lot of that depends on the kind of company you work for. Some companies For example, when I first started off, I worked for a small Japanese brand called Michiko Kashino. And I worked on their denim line called Yen Jeans. Really abstract, left field, avant-garde product. And in that role, I helped set direction. I worked directly with the founder on the creative direction. I designed about a third to 50% of the product with another designer who was based in Japan. We split design duties. We split half and half. Pattern cutting duties, they were split into thirds, because I would pattern cut. I would literally get down and pattern cut some of the product. We had an in-house studio, so they would pattern cut a third, and in Japan they would pattern cut a third. In other companies, I wouldn't pattern cut as much, but I would take that experience to communicate to the factories of how things should be cut, how they should be fit. So relaying that experience, and as you kind of get into bigger organizations, you do get a little bit further removed from the making. But that all came full circle, and I worked with Hussein Chalayan on the collaboration between Puma and himself, where he was now the new creative director of their Black Station. It was the highest status line, and I was working with him in the studio. So I got back to being in the studio and playing and pattern cutting. So yeah, there is a slight divorce from actual making, but a lot of that is if you want to go back into the studio or at home and make something to prove the concept, prove the idea, you can certainly use this to help validate your ideas and build prototypes.
The fashion industry is known to be very intense, for want of a better description. What was for you the most brutal behind the scenes lesson you learned inside any of these fashion giants?
So working at Sean John at the time when they were at their peak, they were one of the biggest clothing labels in America at the time. And I was working on this small niche label. And I remember my first presentation for my first ever collection that I presented to Puffy, and he didn't like it. And the question was, where do you get this direction from? This wasn't what we were about. And this was, I worked under a creative director, a design director, and we had gone back and forth about where we should take this line. And, the decision was made to take it in a certain direction, which of course you follow. And I did this, presented to Puffy. It wasn't what he wanted. And he was very clear. And the brutal but fair lesson was this, and I remember this quote, this isn't your fault, but it is your problem.
Okay.
Right? So it was something that my responsibility as the lead on this line was to fix the problem, which was what I did. I went back to the lab, brutal hours to fix this issue, redesigning the collection, recreating it, going almost tearing it all up and starting again, but presenting something that when he saw it, he loved it. So this is exactly what this is meant to be. This fulfilled the vision. So the brutal lesson there essentially was accountability, responsibility. This is your line. I could go there and point fingers and say, is this person, but if I'm the person hired to do this job, it's my job to figure out. In tandem to that, you don't figure out by yourself. That was the lesson I learned there as well. I still had to bring in teammates. I still had to work with the technical department, graphic department, to make sure that what was presented was in line, right? So you realize you're not an island. There's no point trying to be an island. You have to build relationships in-house.
It's not your fault, but it's your problem. When you were starting off, you said there's quite a number of brutal.
Yeah.
Is there a second one you can say?
Second one, okay. I think institutionally, I won't name the brand, but I did work for a brand where I realized, and I've always realized the problems always start at the top, and you can have people in the middle who have their issues, their challenges, and a particular individual who was managing me had a problem with me. I started before this person. They came in. They were senior. They decided I was a threat. They didn't like me, whatever the reason was, and I tried to build bridges, but the bridges were torn down before they could be finished. But I realized the brutal truth here was the support from, leadership above, who saw the issue, acknowledged the issue, acknowledged it wasn't my fault, but also didn't try to solve the problem, right? And so I realized the brutal lesson there was institutionally, you have to look not just at the culture of a place, because the culture, actually, the colleagues I worked with were amazing, but the leadership culture was one very much of, I don't want to deal with the problem. And so there I saw the need for organizations to build great, cohesive, functional organizational structures, right, to support essentially the work that needs to be done and the individuals that need to do it. And these are the things that have helped shape my shift into working on creative strategy and strategic projects as well. Because the problem isn't just the design. So it's the structures around it. Exactly.
When you talk to up and coming fashion houses and creatives, what do you tell them? Because you've seen it in big spaces, and what can they do to avoid becoming like those places, if ever it's even avoidable? For instance, let's take a fashion house up and coming in here in Nairobi, Vivo or Icon, Itikadi.
Yeah. I think when I've spoken to, small designers, young designers, up and coming brands here in Nairobi, the two things I've told them, I've advised them, I think is paramount, is one, build your team. And this is advice I got very early on in my career, was you build a team of excellence around you to be able to deliver on the vision. Is build a team where the talent is in the right places, and build a culture that facilitates that talent to be able to do the best they can. And the second kind of advice I give is similar to build a team, build your organizational structure. You've got a creative team, make sure you have a marketing team, an operations team, a product development team. Even if that team is one person, but someone really going hard on that role, I think it's key, because there are a lot of amazingly talented, individuals or partnerships, maybe stretching themselves a bit too thin, and for various reasons. But if you can build a team, build a team. I remember sitting at a British Council event. They had a lot of creatives in a room, one of the summits, and it was a conversation around funding and investment. And I remember a designer standing up and talking to somebody on the panel, asking about how they could access funds. It was like a creative economy type of summit, how they could access funds as a designer. Then I saw another person stand up and said, well, I'm an illustrator. How do I access funds? Because all the funds seem to be for designers. Someone else got up and said, well, I'm a pattern cutter. I work in the technical side of it, but all the funds seem to be more towards designers. Someone else stood up and said, I'm a filmmaker, and there doesn't seem to be much of a film fund. And then I looked at this and I stood up and I said, guys, I hear the challenges. And if I could just lend some of my experience, working with great teams, that was where the success came from. They were teams. And I see somebody does film, you could work with the designer to work on their marketing, to help shape their story, share the narrative. I see a technical person who could help the designer realize their vision through excellent product using your skills. And I can see an illustrator could also help to visualize what's happening. If you all work together, you have a great team that could,
build something
really special.
Yeah. The funding.
And the funders will probably look at you really favorably because you're approaching them as a team, as an with good organizational structure. So this is generally be my advice, and also build an ecosystem, which is really counterintuitive, because I'll say one designer to their competing designer is you probably need each other.
Yeah.
Because you need to create almost like a groundswell of interest around what you do, rather than just be a solo destination. right?
That's actually a very strong point you made. And in this journey, trying to build Afro quality is one of the things that we realize that when we're trying to bring a lot of creatives together under this umbrella, there's that sense of people wanting to distance themselves because they feel like you're bringing the competition. But then I'm like, the competition is not your other person making down the street here in Nairobi or in Accra. Your competition is the people in Nairobi spending their money buying things from Turkey, whereas you could actually occupy that market if you're able to leverage off your strengths and be able to meet the demand or produce at a price point that is much more competitive, which is a lot of the conversations that most people don't tend to have.
Yeah, and I get it, because as a young designer, I thought it was all about really cool designs. And to a large degree, that's probably like 80% of it. Some may say less. But the other side of it is knowing your customer, knowing the segment you're trying to serve, your position in amongst your competitors or adjacencies, and putting forward a proposition that people feel emotionally. If you step back, people go to a more like Village Market or Sarah Center because they know it's a great destination where they can find lots of brands. And so that one brand, why they speak to their customer to bring them in to their shop, there's a lot of traffic that's inside the mall that will pass by your store and come into you. Why? Because there's an ecosystem, right? And you're a part of that ecosystem, which just from a practical standpoint, it's more foot traffic that can discover you. If you're a lone wolf in a small place, and depending if it suits you to be a lone wolf in a small, in a small part of the city, but you're getting the customers you want at the frequency you want, perfect.
But definitely would take time.
It takes time, but I don't. But I don't begrudge anyone who says, you know what, I just want to do my thing, keep it small, keep it tight, keep it really focused. I'm like, that's fine. If the struggle is numbers and more traffic, maybe you want to be in a space where there are more designers, because you all collectively bring in more people, more interest. People go to Fifth Avenue because they know there's a lot of amazing stores. They go to Oxford Street in the UK because there's a load of amazing stores, and everyone benefits and eats off of that. So build an ecosystem,
No, I think the point is well made, because the big brands that you talk about in the space, I don't think there's that many of them who got to that level by just being niche and not being in some of these spaces where you would find what you'd call their competitors, but then they leveraged off each other. And maybe doing more of that on the continent should help a lot of our local brands. Ideally, to have a street somewhere in Nairobi where you have all the fashion houses and all the fashion brands, then now it can become a destination for tourists or people who want to buy stuff, to know if I need all the quality African brands, I can go on this street and I'll find all the shops. Maybe we'll build that later. We call it Afro Quality Street.
Right, let's see, Afro Quality Street. I'm laughing because I'm British, right? So the chocolate quality street. But I digress. But I think people instinctively understand this as well, because we all grew up shopping in markets.
Yes.
Going to a market, looking at the vendors, everyone's hustling to get customers to come to them. But everyone was eating
in the same place. You worked. You talked about this. Your time with Puma, working on the Hussein Chalayan's era. What did it teach you about blending tech, performance, fashion? And maybe to start with, tell us about what that was all about.
So Hussein Chalayan, an amazing high-end, ready-to-wear, conceptual fashion designer. He's. I don't want to get it wrong, Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot, or if I'm wrong, forgive me, designer, based in London, but he would show at the Paris catwalks, really developed really innovative ideas and approaches to clothing that transcended just pure wearable garments. He joined Puma as their creative director for their high-end offering. And one of the lines that he looked after was called Urban Mobility, and it was this blend of, it was essentially where the street meets fashion meets sportswear. Quite fresh at the time. I think more people have leaned into this space of this fusion. But yeah, so he joined. I'd already worked on a previous iteration of this line, and I was one of the members that he moved over to his team to help develop this new offering, which was better fabrics, better quality, more premium, much more conceptual. We made modular garments. We made garments that were transformable. So parka jackets that turn into sleeping bags, and jackets that had extra pockets that you couldn't see. I mean, really, kind of next level stuff. This was a full circle moment for me. Because remember I said I started off at Mitch Kokashino, the denim brand, where we were doing really avant-garde denim, also modular, also transformable. And that's where I think we were just going crazy. We were like crazy designers. And if I look back in it, there are always things as a designer you kind of cringe at, I could have done this better, but you know what you know at the time. So this was a moment to almost have a very similar approach in terms of blending commercial fashion with super high conceptual garments under this big brand umbrella. And how do you balance being super conceptual and commercial at the same time? And so it was a great full circle moment for me and a really big learning. But it goes back to this idea of fusion. I could blend tailoring, I could blend streetwear, I could blend sportswear in a line that said, this is exactly what we want to do. So for me, it was a full circle moment. And it also, I think, in some way kind of justified those early experiments I had when I was younger, that this is where I always thought menswear would go, particularly, that you'll see this fusion, because I was a walking fusion myself, street kid who would wear baggy trousers with a blazer and a shirt, thinking we were cool. And now you see the industry almost doing the same thing. And this was a full circle, almost validation for me at that point.
You talked about some of the projects that you worked on. Looking back, they make sense, but at the points, a bit off the beaten path. Which projects felt like the first time you really left an indelible footprint when it comes to the global fashion industry?
Ironically, it was the line that when I was approached to work on it, I said no. I think I've said no originally twice in my career. The first one, ironically, was working for Sean John, and I'd gone from a hip hop kid, grew up in hip hop fashion, knew it inside out. So growing up in the UK, hip hop kid, growing up on street fashion, knowing it inside out, and being asked to work on a hip hop fashion line in New York. I was based in London at the time, and my first response was, nah, it's not me. The reason being, I had studied as a tailor, and I'd brought streetwear into tailoring. And so this was the thing I wanted to explore. And I then started to dabble into denim, and I thought, this is interesting. And ironically, the sportswear that they were doing, the stuff that I saw coming out of Sean John wasn't the place I wanted to be with what I was doing. It was, great denim, tracksuits, t-shirts, coats. It wasn't, I guess, contemporary fashion where I was. I was trying to bring the essence that Sean John had into a different space. But on conversation with the creative director at Sean John, it was to work on this small niche line called Blue, which was taking hip hop attitude into a different space. I turned around and said, yes, this is what I want to do. So that was a lesson for me in terms of finding the right fit for me, not just because the company was big or popular, or I'd literally gone to concerts and seen this guy perform in front of me on stage, right?
And you're screaming his name
at the time, right? So I was a fan to some of the music, and being asked to join it, the question became, is this me as a creative, as a professional? And it wasn't until the line was correct. But we joined, and we made a dent, I think, at the time for what we were doing on the site. It was a small niche line. But that lesson carried through when I said no the second time to Puma. When Puma, the opportunity came up, to design a golf line. And that was my response, okay. For me, I was so far removed from golf. Like, I'd been to a driving range, with my girlfriend at the time, and we'd hit golf balls on a driving range for fun, but I had no interest in golf. Again, I spoke to the design directors, and they said, you know what, we're trying to build this line that, and their mission, these are two European white guys, said, look, at this time, the brand's viewpoint is that golf is too white, too male, and too kind of middle upper class. It's not inclusive, it's not dynamic, it doesn't even fit with our ethos as a brand. But we think there's a space there for us to go into this space and to shake up the golf industry by offering product that is more inclusive aesthetically. So it's a bit informed by fashion, where golf wasn't at the time. That through our activations and through how we promote it, promotes inclusivity that includes women at the forefront alongside men, because at the time some golf clubs were very male only exclusive. And so this was a mission that I could get behind. You know, it fit into my politics, it fit into where I was coming from in terms of being inside an industry and trying to shake up where you can. And we managed to launch the golf line. Well, the golf line was launched just before I came, and I came in and I expanded it, helped shape the identity, the aesthetic of it with the team. And we managed to shake up the industry. I think this is one project I can look back on and without any shadow of a doubt say we helped change how golf was approached from an aesthetic standpoint, how sports brands could play in this space, how you could approach marketing, how you could be more dynamic, more inclusive. I think, and you know, and this was a line that, you know, when I left the business, multiple millions of dollars it was worth at the time. So yeah, we helped shake up the industry. So I think this is something that I can look back on and go, without any shadow of a doubt, like we went in and we shook things up and made a difference.
Now, when such traditional state institutions get shaken up, there's that thin or fine line of some sort of hijacking of street culture.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about that?
All the time, because it's, you know, I'm old school enough to know those raw conversations of, are these corporate companies coming in to co-opt our culture, co-opt who we are? And there's always, it's a continual struggle. I think what was fun at Puma was they weren't trying to be, it wasn't a streetwear golf brand by a corporate sports company, for argument's sake. For Puma, or brands like Puma who had been adopted by black culture, let's say, in terms of the sneakers or trainers. I'm from the UK, everyone in the UK, forgive me. Trainers, you know, we wore Pumas, we wore Nike. We called it Nike when I was young, it's Nike. Adidas. You know, these were brands that were adopted by street culture. Polo, Ralph Lauren, adopted by street culture. And we subverted the meaning of a lot of these brands and a lot of the footwear. And so in that, there was always this tense alliance, so to speak. And I don't think in any of my roles I felt compromised. When I was at Adidas, I worked on Adidas Originals, which is their kind of streetwear, urban culture focused line. But there, what's interesting is the development, you know, the way we worked essentially was to see how we could fit into the cultures at the time. And I felt, while there's always question marks, I guess, about the hierarchy of the line, where people are from and who's informing these collections, I think us on the ground we're creating capsules and collections that felt as honest as possible to various aspects of urban culture, because we weren't just informed by black culture, we were informed by, I remember lines I worked on informed by Russian street culture, informed by South Korean street culture. And the challenge there, as always, is how do you create something informed by culture without appropriating it, without being offensive, by taking elements that there's shared synergy, as opposed to saying, okay, this is Chinese, let's get some Chinese silk, put on a tracksuit and call it Chinese inspired, right? Okay. The work was always done to like take it a step further, develop it a bit more. And I think this rigor, I come from a generation where that rigor, you know, was inherent in our process. So while I don't think everyone's got it right all the time, I think there's a way to get it to be as good as possible, or as thoughtful as possible.
Have you ever watched a trend come up within fashion or maybe even within the street culture that's been hijacked by luxury brands in the way that it becomes big with a luxury brand and nobody remembers that this actually originated from this street culture somewhere in, I don't know, Hackney or somewhere?
I think with a lot of luxury brands, I remember Louis Vuitton got in trouble years back by co-opting the shuka, the Kenyan shuka, the plaid patterns, the Maasai wore, and putting this on the catwalk without any recognition of where it came from, which I think is one of the first steps. Is this isn't just a nice pattern or idea, this came from somewhere. And I think there are way brands can acknowledge it in a way that is more respectful. There's been so many trends that have come and go. Some of them are short, where we know they came from the street and it gets propped up on the catwalk, referencing aspects of our culture. I don't know why I've gone blank, but there's been a few. There have been a few, and I think the challenge always is these brands, they have power. They have the media platforms, the Fashion Week platforms, the magazines, and the challenge is if you're going to borrow, be inspired by, lend from, steal from a culture or from a place, the industry still hasn't figured out what is the line of where you're supposed to, what line do you draw, where and how do you give credit. If you've taken an idea from here, but you've fused it with an idea from here, and then you've got this other new idea and you pull it all together and there's something new, but it's being informed by these places, when does it become appropriation versus not? And this has been a big challenge that some brands have done it sensitively, other brands have not. And when they haven't, I think they're right. It's right they get called out. It's right they get challenged and get told to do better.
It's interesting. I'd seen something on social media a while back. I think it was Versace with the logo, and there were pictures of some village in Cameroon, which were like taken years ago, and they had those signs on the walls, and there were people making a lot of noise that, look, these are all things that point back to some sort of cultural appropriation. I've seen like slippers designed like traditional, what you call in Ghana, the ahenema. We have those brands here in Afro-Quality, the Tokota, you see them on big fashion brand websites, and there's no recognition that this actually originated from the Akan Kingdom or something like that. It's real.
It's real. No, it is. I think Adidas got in trouble a while back. I think it was a collab with one of, I forget his name. I think is he a Mexican designer? Was it William Chavarria? I'm bad with names. But they, he took a sandal, a slipper, that was native to where he was from. And from his perspective, I think he said this is an homage to that slipper, and they attached like a sportswear sole to it. But there's a lot of pushback because I think the bigger impact, there's a lot of pushback from the communities. I think Adidas pulled the line, the slipper, if I'm correct. There was a lot of pushback, and they rightfully pulled it back because there's an economic impact to this as well. If you start to flood a market with your appropriated designs, you could be taking people out of decades worth of legacy jobs and careers and heritage, and really affecting local markets. And I think this is where, for me, I think from a brand standpoint, or from a designer standpoint, generally everything, this to be controversial, is fair game, as long as you push it forward far enough from its original source, so someone can see it and go, okay, this is being inspired by, but it's not a copy. You haven't just stolen this idea. You've changed it significantly enough for it to become something new, right? I come from hip hop culture. We would take old records, remix them. We would reshape it. So you hear the original, you can hear the original in it, but the end product is something that's quite different. And that's always been a point of contest, right? Like how far do you go? And I think, I think we have to have more honest conversations with ourselves in the fashion industry about that space between inspiration and copying and where you fall on that. And also you can't take away the power dynamic, right? Of you being able to say this is our thing, whether it's box braids, versus, we grew up with braids, and now, you have American, celebrities wearing this thing and removing it from its historical place. And I think these are the challenges that need to be called out and addressed when it does happen.
If for you, you could take one cultural aesthetic back from mainstream, what would it be?
I think there's a lot of that happens, is things that come from black cultures, brown cultures, and they're seen as undesirable or not of worthy status, et cetera, get reappropriated and told that it's desirable or beautiful. I think should be challenged. And of course, there's also, you don't want to over-sexualize this as well, right? Yeah. So there's these multiple challenges. But that's the one thing that I've seen that is really, you look at it, you go, yeah.
What did Nairobi give you? Or is Nairobi giving you that London couldn't give?
I grew up in England, in London, big cosmopolitan city. Really, I grew up in really diverse communities, right? I grew up with friends from everywhere, and but there is still this weight of racism, whether it's inherent or not. And I think Nairobi, being in a place that is majority black, majority African, but also in a place that is also very international and very diverse. The one thing that's noticeable is that weight of, that heaviness of inherent, subtle, institutional, racism or othering, isn't there from that perspective. It's given me a bit of breathing space to a degree. I think on a more tangible side, I think, I realize, I've grown up in a space of relative infrastructural, if that's a word, privilege, right? Things work generally, various qualities, but things work. And I think here, especially if I look from a professional lens, outside of just the living challenges, a professional lens, what I see is the need for there to be that ecosystem and infrastructure built up, right? To see that, look, there are other challenges that need to be met here. I talk to designers and creatives or business people who have had to almost build their own ecosystem,
the whole value chain,
just to make things work. Whereas there's a privilege of being able just to be a fashion designer and have a line, and you just hope people like it and you can get stocked. This is your big challenge. While here, you got to think about that supply chain, that value chain all the way through. So Nairobi has sobered me up in that regard.
Do diaspora creatives returning to Africa, do they bring healing or arrogance or disruption?
It's two-way. I think they bring all of those things. I think they also bring maybe perspective, different experiences. And at the same token, I think it can be met with suspicion, sometimes resistance. And I get it, because you grew up as, someone of the diaspora, of a black man in the UK. You understand the tensions of people coming in and feeling like people are taking from you, whether it's the conversation around cultural appropriation and, or freedoms, or people just taking liberties. I understand it. When done properly, or done the right way, there's less arrogance, but there may be confidence, right? I think there's a certain confidence that, you can bring into a space like Nairobi, that could support, but it could easily veer into arrogance if you're not careful, right? So I think coming here and being humble, having some humility, understanding the space, the rhythm of the space, how things work, where the challenges are, and not just bring a cut and paste set of solutions.
What has been the most humbling moment for you being back on the continent?
Yeah, I don't think it's humbling in that sense. I think it's just the realities on the ground, in terms of ecosystem infrastructure to support those who are trying to, get to the next step in their own kind of maybe professional creative journey. That's the biggest challenge.
From where you started as like a pure play artisan, cutting, sewing, and all that, has consulting made you less of a maker?
Yeah, I think I trained as a maker, but I made a conscious decision. Because I trained as a tailor, and I was training in the bespoke tailoring, so that's really, I guess, the highest level of tailoring you can get. But I decided very early on that this wasn't the end or the path for me. I might end up being a tailor in my later years, but I always wanted to understand construction from a technical level right at the beginning of my career to inform me to be able to go on to create, lead teams, design for teams, work with other artisans who could have that as their focus. So the play for me was never to be a pure maker all the way through.
Okay.
I think becoming, again, working in an industry where you realize you work in teams, you make decisions. Do you want to be a technical designer, a product developer, so almost like the engineer of the fashion game, where you're either in between the studio or working with factories wasn't my lane. I'm much more of a designer, a design thinker, a creative strategist in that sense. So yeah, I'm less of a hands-on maker. I'm a designer who can make.
Do you still feel the rush to want to even try your hands on making and get your hands dirty? Does it come to you at some point?
Yeah, I'm always at home. You know, even my office space is set up like a part studio, part office. You know, I'm always tinkering with items and clothing. I'm always, you know, sketching, being creative, but I still feel the urge to create things. And I think what's shifted in me is that it's almost again, it's to be here on the continent and design and have someone make it is fairly straightforward. But I think the challenges are a little bit deeper. And so a lot of my interest coming here has shifted slightly from being just, I just want to make stuff, to if I want to make stuff at the level that I know things can be made at, I might need to put some legwork in and helping build some of the infrastructure.
What is required to make that
to build it? Yeah. And again, that's just come from experience of realizing, looking at the challenges designers have: access to materials, access to quality manufacturing, consistent manufacturing, access to capital, access to markets. These are the challenges that if I can help kind of solve some of these things, then making becomes, I'm making to the level that I know that, you know, creatives can here and myself, I can reach, but you're gonna have to build as well.
But do you think that strategists command the respect or even the recognition in the space on the continent, especially when you see the level of suspicion that the creators or the makers have of strategists?
I think the unique thing I have, and it's just been we call it accident or privilege of where I was born, is, you know, and also just the career I've developed, is I have, you know, people like myself have perspective and experience and exposure to maybe best practice from other places, as well as if you do your research on the continent, you can see best practice here as well, and exposure to how things are done in some of these markets that people want to get into. And so in that sense, if a strategist or a consultant can bring tangible value to whoever they're engaging with, by means of experience or exposure or perspective, that help enhance whatever that creative, in the lane that I work in, is doing, then the respect should come. And if it doesn't, if the work's good, the work's good. Like I was at Puma for a number of years and I had a lot of fun because I was able to execute on my ideas because there was a big machine behind me. Right, so we could use the best technology, the best techniques, we could really prototype things, and that's a privilege to be in that space. But you realize, even at a low level, it's just about having the right team. As long as you can find a way for that to sustain you, even if you decide, I just want a humble life. For me, that's fine, as long as it makes you happy. But I think it's understanding. What is it you want? What is it you do? How do you make the two things connect as best as possible?
I remember I've had a conversation once with a gentleman, and his point of view was the music space was always there. The only reason why it was able to take off and today get global is that the strategist came on the table and understood how to apply it. And of course, timing was relevant, but then there was a science behind the kind of music that was being made, how they were structuring the music, how they were marketing it. So the view was, if we are to see that replicated in the fashion industry or any other space on the continent, it's not going to be an accident. And it's also not going to be that because Afrobeats has done it, so African fashion can do it by accident. There has to be that structure and that strategy behind it. And from what you are saying, I can actually see that point just plays back in my head.
Yeah, I think we should all take a step back. Designers, creatives, strategists, operators, marketers, I think we want to take a step back. I think, it takes a well-oiled machine to make these things blow up.
It takes a village.
It does take a village, right? And it's even Afrobeats, it gained the contemporary popularity it did in the UK. I remember being there, this just blew up. And in the States it blew up. Why? Because you have to go back maybe a generation and see the parents that came over and brought Afrobeat, brought Afrobeat to the UK or to Europe, let's say. And then their kids grew up listening to Afrobeat, listening to hip hop, listening to R&B, listening to house. And then once this new sound that kind of blends all of these things starts to emerge, it's the young people that relate to it, that take it up and go, I'm going to add some raps onto this, I'm going to add some singing onto this. And if you listen to the music, it takes elements of the previous generation's music and culture, fused with their own identity. And then these are the kids that, I look at my generation, slightly older, we're not going out to the clubs every week, every month, putting money into promoters' hands, into artists' hands on that level. But young people are. They're going out and they're creating their own subculture. And it's those subcultures that started to gain a lot of traction, that started to cross borders. And that's essentially what blew up. So it was a mix of understanding, legacy, history, generations, right time, right place, young people, independent artists making music, pirate radio culture, underground radio culture, all these things that contributed to this. And it's maybe the strategists or the marketers were there at the right time, but it's also understanding these shifts in culture. And I think going back to the big brands I've worked in, half of our research was understanding culture, shifting culture, because we're designing for the future. We're designing for a product that's not going to hit the market for another 12 to 18 months. So we weren't thinking about what's happening now. We were always thinking about what's going to happen, what do we think is going to inform that, and how can we be there at the right place. And these companies do it well enough for them to be consistently selling in the millions or sometimes billions for product that's being made now, that's not going to reach us for another year, and it always seems to feel right. So I think we all take a little bit, maybe too much credit. Oh, it's my great design. Oh no, it's my great marketing. Oh, it's my great strategy. Oh, it was my great. Maybe it's all of us.
It's all that together.
Yeah, working together at the right time, right speed. Yeah.
There's been a lot of conversations or talk about fast fashion, slow fashion. So where do you see the continent in terms of the evolution of the fashion industry, and what should really be our position on fast fashion, slow fashion?
We need to find a solution that protects these cultures that we have. Then there is the need for jobs. We're the youngest continent. We're going to be the youngest continent. I think everyone's preparing for 2030, 2050 in terms of what this continent will look like. To call a political term, it's incumbent on us to be prepared for what tomorrow looks like. In terms of fast fashion, I think there's always a rush for big corporations to find the cheapest market to manufacture their clothing in, to keep prices down for consumers. I think protect what we have, our legacy. You don't go to Italy and demand the finest Italian craftsmanship at a cheap price, but people come here and do it, right? So we need to protect these heritages we have, these crafts, maker heritages we have, and also improve on them. Make sure the quality is worthy of asking, for that value to be respected. And then we need to create jobs for young people. And so while fast fashion and other industries will help create masses of jobs, and you see it in the special zones where there's lots of job creation for people that need work, but it's finding a balance between work, between product that doesn't harm us in the long run, and between protecting our the legacies and heritages we have.
Would you collaborate with a fast fashion brand if that means that you can be able to execute something that will be meaningful on the continent?
There are a few brands I wouldn't work. There are very few brands I wouldn't work with, but I've worked in a space of more high-end fashion. I've worked on premium fashion and more what we call accessible fashion, and they all do good and do harm in different ways. If we keep it real. Would I work with a fast fashion brand? Depends on what the project is and what they're doing, and what the output is, and what the impact is, and what the damage potentially could be. I am more interested in working with local, regional designers on helping them to have, play a bigger stake in the current industry.
Do you think that we can skip the fast fashion phase and get to a stage where we would not have fast fashion, but something that is medium or secular on the continent? And what would that look like? What kind of structures would have to exist for something like that to become a reality?
We don't have to retrofit old structures and old processes in the way that maybe the global north has to walk into this more responsible, circular, maybe not fast, maybe not slow, more medium, as you've said, world. It can take a bit of innovation, a bit of imagination. The continent is primed to do it because there are these craft legacies all across the continent that can both protect, like I said, certain legacies, as well as provide viable jobs and professions for people. What does it look like? I think it's going to take government policy. It's going to take the industry. It's going to take local makers, entrepreneurs, young people, educators. Again, it's a broader ecosystem. The global north hasn't done this through one industry. You've got great government policy that supports trade, that protects the IP of local industries or innovations, education institutions, that prepare the next generation to be, meaningful contributors to their society. And then you have infrastructure that means people don't have to just struggle every day just to live. We've seen examples of it being done right now. So I think it can be done on the continent here as well.
Is this theory around consumption as infrastructure, which is the part where we tend not to focus on, that there's a certain mindset for the African around whether they would buy something that is African. And it goes back, we can trace it back to colonialism and the structures around the mindset. But if that aspect does not get worked on and fixed, you can do all the hard work, you can put on all the factories and everything, and you would still not succeed because you would not get the demand, the consumption that is necessary to make you succeed. So we can look at the population dynamics and say Africa is going to grow 2050, 1 out of every 3 human beings on the planet is going to be African. But if you don't fix the consumption, that population will be consuming products that are not African because they are not wired and designed for that kind of consumption.
You lean into what you have, right? You lean into what you're already good at, and you find ways to innovate on that space, to increase the quality, which I think if you can do that, it should naturally increase some of the demand. For the continent, if the skill level is there to be able to say, look, we can compete with Turkey or China or USA or Portugal or wherever it may be, or India, wherever it may be, on these particular processes and aspects, I'm like, that's what we should develop. Again, we should lean in. I'm a big advocate of just leaning into the heritage we already have, whether it's, basket weaving or cloth weaving, be the best, keep innovating on these traditions so that you stay at the forefront, even of just your own craftsmanship.
There's a lot happening in the tech space.
Yeah.
Which part of it keeps you up at night? Like when you think about AI, does it excite you as a design tool, or do you feel like it threatens culture?
The challenges with a technology like AI is that what it does, it just aggregates existing information. Right, if you're looking at like a ChatGPT, like a large language learning model, it just aggregates the information it can find on the net, on the web, etc. The challenge we have as let's say native peoples, because I think it covers us beyond just the continent, is a lot of our knowledge, our perspectives, our values aren't in the places that AI is taking knowledge from, and people are leaning on AI as the bastion of all knowledge. And so the challenge we have is a question which some people say we shouldn't be a part of this quite narrow,
Viewpoint.
increasingly domineering technology, and others say we need to have our knowledge on the internet in places as well, even just languages, so that what it builds is something that looks like us or reflects us. There are challenges between the people that are behind these technologies and their ultimate motivations. Some people would argue that they don't have the best intentions for humanity. Others would argue that they are. I'm being deliberately vague because I haven't done the research behind the scenes for me to say this person I think is, I wouldn't, I'm not informed enough, but I hear conversations from people that are informed.
Are close enough, yeah.
So there are challenges. I think there are definitely inherent biases, and at the moment, I don't know personally whether we need to lean into making sure our information, our knowledge is on the net, let's say, because the people that are still running these large companies don't reflect us. They're not us. So the question is always going to be, do you trust these people to do right by you? And unfortunately, history at this point isn't favorable towards that. So I think we need to stay critical. They are also tools. I use AI. I found it to be useful. I use it as a research partner. I haven't used AI as a design tool yet, but it's something that I want to explore to understand it before I critique it. I know in my industry there's a lot of tension around how do we use AI? Can it help you with your workflows? Would it become something that replaces the creative? I don't think it will. I think there's something about the randomness of human ingenuity that computers haven't got to yet. I try to use it as a tool, but not something I lean on purely.
Do you see it being able to capture the essence of African craftsmanship?
I think the one thing AI can't do, it can't make. It can design.
It can't make yet.
It can't make yet. We've got automation, which we've seen it as replace industries and creating new ones, but yeah, it can't make it yet. But I think there's always going to be a space. Humans we're very reactionary. I remember that when the death of vinyl was heralded, and now vinyl is being back for a while, right? Because I think there's something about us that still want things that are tangible. And so if AI was to come in and be able to automate basket weaving, was to automate or 3D print something that looks like it could have been basket woven, there's still something about, again, the randomness of human ingenuity that I think would be missing at this point. And again, it's, there's still some things it can't do. So I think our generation is protected, maybe the next couple of generations are protected. Beyond that, I don't know. And I'm a big sci-fi geek, right? I watch the Star Treks, and if I look at where AI could go, which I think is probably the scariest thing for us now in the way we think, is so forgive me, people, I'm going on a tangent here. And if you look at Star Trek, they're the replicators, where you just ask the computer for something, cup of tea, and it just magics a cup of tea for you. They can magic a sculpture for you. That I think is for makers and creatives the scariest thing, because it devoids us of our talent.
Craft.
I think there's always going to be a space for people that can make, because people will want to know that, wow, you could have made this in 10 seconds through this machine that we have, but you spent 2 days making this thing. And there's an appreciation we still have of humans, of things that have taken time to be crafted and be made, and have a bit of that intangible human spirit, soul in it. And so I think there's always going to be a space. I think it's going to be rebalanced. I just hope that the industrialists, the government, the law policymakers ensure that there's still space, and the people as well. We advocate for ourselves, and we ensure that we vote for the people that ensure that our
there's space
interests.
for humans to have something to do.
Yeah, I think so. Or maybe we just all chill and we just play all day.
Well,
leisurely lives.
there's a school of thought that believes that maybe this is the point where we get to what we want as paradise, where you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that any human being living a life where you don't have to do anything will find fulfillment.
I agree.
But maybe we've never lived that life before, so we don't know.
Yeah. And maybe what we're looking for is spiritual transcendence. And we spend our time trying to connect with our higher selves, Who knows?
What's the hardest truth that you've had to tell a young designer?
Sometimes, and I was guilty of this. I'll design something and think, this is it. It can't change. And I would try to force this idea into reality, into being, even if the best thing for this idea to come into being was for it to shift and develop slightly, right? So I would, for case in point, if I was to make I want to make a multi-layered shirt, I'm going back, and then people, then the questions are, does it fit right? Does it fall right? This thing won't quite work because the materials, there's a tension between it. But I'm adamant, this is the idea I want. And you fight for the idea, and the idea gets greenlit. And it gets produced, and you look at it and go, oh, this doesn't quite work here. These things don't quite work. Because maybe at the time I didn't look at it as, here's a proposition. I want to make this multi-layered shirt, concept with these different fabrics that generally shouldn't work, but I want to find a way to make it work. And see that whole process as, this is a starting point, and we're going to iterate, and we're going to prototype, and we're going to develop this thing until it gets to the best version of what it could be within the time span and budget we have. That's the hardest thing, I think, for a lot of early designers, is your ideas are just propositions, and you have to go through that process, knowing that it might make a few shifts and changes to make it work, versus to keep your idea as the idea it should be, and letting go and allowing other voices to give opinions, and for you to then go through that journey of making the best, taking the best and leaving, ideas that aren't working for you, to produce something that might not be the thing you started with, but is the thing it should be.
Now, as a creative going on that journey,
Yeah.
there's a temptation, or there's a possibility of that you begin to doubt yourself or question, because you are trying to figure out what would make it work, or why is it not working the way you had thought it should. When did you last doubt yourself, your purpose, and how did you keep going?
I think if you're doing it right, you're gonna be doubting. If you're doing it, so let me rephrase. If you're doing it right, and you have a high taste level, and you have a high need for good quality, that's process going to be challenging, because it's hard to make things well, that function as they should do, that look as you want them to look. So you always, I don't think there's not been one project that I've gone through that I haven't felt that tension of a bit of doubt, a bit of frustration. Is this thing going to work? Because essentially you're bringing something new into the world and you don't know what it looks like yet. Yeah. You have an idea of it, you have a sketch of it, and as you go through it, sometimes you get lucky and you make it, and it's exactly what you want. And I think experience helps, makes that journey shorter. But if you're on the innovative side of things, you're trying to innovate something new, there's going to be doubt. There's going to be frustration, because you're creating something that hasn't been done yet. If you're just moving the needle along, like, we love this shirt's our top seller, we just need to do it in a different fabric, different color, there's less doubt, there's less tension, because you're not moving the needle that far along. But I generally operate in a space where I'm trying to move the needle. So there's always a bit of doubt that creeps in, but that keeps you sharp.
When you look at the space you're operating in right now, do you see yourself as a bridge builder, as a gatekeeper, or something else?
I think the term I'm settling on now, I'm an expansionist. Did I just make up another? I might have made up another word today.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy the space. I've worked with a lot of startups. What I enjoy is someone that started up but need a bit of direction, a bit of focus. They want to expand it. And if I look back on my career, that's what I've been doing, and I've done that fairly successfully. And I enjoy that space of, we have this thing, and we want to get it over here. How do we get there? And I think, and I enjoy that space. It's like a jigsaw puzzle for me. It's like, okay, we need these pieces. We need to make this thing work. Even when I'm creating collections, in my head, there are always jigsaw puzzles that need to fit together because you're building a range of things that need to be cohesive, but also have their own identities. And I enjoy that process. And so I think, I'm here to help expand. And I think capacity building has always been an underpinning thing. It's what led me into education when I was, lecturing in universities and working with young people. And I'm a mentor. So capacity building and kind of expansionist. I think these are the things that I would say that's the space I operate in.
If your students in London or your peers in Nairobi or in SA, they have to write a joint letter about you, what would you want that letter to say?
It's less of what I want to say. As long as it's accurate, it's accurate. And if there's things I need to work on, I need to go away and work on it. I think it's funny, I reconnected with an old colleague just the other day, actually. We've been going back and forth on text. And I remember he said, this is a colleague of mine, I worked with him in Sean John years ago. And I think the one thing he said to me that I kind of nodded in the phone, yeah, that's kind of me. He goes, you know what? You're kind of serious. And I kind of had to nod. And ironically, maybe a month and a half ago, my daughter said something really similar. Daddy, you can be really serious sometimes, but you're kind of cool, you're kind of all right. And I kind of froze because I was like, wow. She almost echoed the same thing with a friend of mine. I think that's what it is. When I'm at work, I can be quite serious about the work, quite particular about the work, particular about delivering quality. I'll push envelopes. I will try to get us to the next phase and a higher phase if possible. But I would like to think that I'm not an idiot in that process. I like people. I enjoy being around people. I can be a loner, but I like my alone time. But I can be quite sociable. So hopefully that's where the cool aspect comes from. Is like I like people and I like to try and bring people together. I generally find myself as the peacemaker, which it can be nice, but means you can take shots from both sides. But yeah, I think serious but cool. And then whatever that falls under. Serious but cool. Serious but cool, yeah.
If the history of African fashion is being written 100 years from now, what line, not a chapter, not a page, but what line do you hope your name sits on?
Just the page of like someone who he helped move things forward. I say I don't need to be the guy, but hopefully part of the narrative that shifted things
forward.
Forward. Yeah.
Richard Mkoloma, it's been amazing talking to you, and I look forward to collaborating with you as we drive this agenda. It's been a wonderful conversation. Our guest has been Richard Mkoloma, also known as Rich Black, a strategist, a creative, an educator in the fashion space. Thank you for joining us on Rooted in Quality.
It's been a pleasure, Saint.
Thank you.
Thank you.